The afternoon sun painted the small town of Maplewood in warm, golden shades. Wind brushed softly through the maple trees outside Emily's porch, scattering red leaves over the wooden steps. The world looked peaceful from the outside, almost picture perfect. But inside that quiet little house, Emily sat by the window, staring at the road beyond her front gate. Lost in thoughts, she never spoke aloud to anyone else. She had everything: a caring husband, a cozy home, and a life of quiet stability. Yet there was something missing, something she couldn't name, but often felt in the stillness of her days. Michael, her husband, was a good man. He worked long hours as a regional manager for a construction firm, often away for days at a time. He always called to check in, always made sure the bills were paid, the groceries stocked, and the plans for their future laid out neatly on paper. But in the spaces between his calls, there were long silences. Emily had grown used to those silences. They were like uninvited guests at her table, always present, never speaking. Every evening she prepared dinner for two, even on nights she knew Michael wouldn't make it home. Habit, maybe? Or hope? The quiet clinking of silverware on empty plates filled the kitchen. Air like a song only she could hear. She had once dreamed of a life full of laughter and shared stories of evenings spent walking hand in hand through the park, or late-night talks about nothing at all. But dreams, she had learned, often fade quietly, not because something breaks, but because time wears them thin. That afternoon, as the clock ticked toward 5, Emily opened the window. The cool air carried the faint scent of rain and wood smoke. She breathed it in deeply, letting it calm her racing thoughts. There was a part of her that still believed something beautiful could happen, even when life felt ordinary. Maybe that was her strength or her weakness. She didn't know. Just as she was about to close the window, a sound startled her: the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. She leaned forward and frowned. Michael wasn't supposed to be home yet, and no one else ever came unannounced. A dark gray car pulled in slowly and stopped. A moment later, a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a simple denim jacket. His face was familiar in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. It took her a second to recognize him. "Daniel?" she whispered under her breath. It had been years since she'd seen him, Michael's younger brother. The last memory she had of him was from her wedding day, standing quietly near the back of the garden ceremony, smiling politely but saying little. There had always been a distance in him, a thoughtful silence that made him different from his more practical, outspoken brother. Now here he was, standing at her front door, his expression a mix of hesitation and fatigue. Emily opened the door before he could knock. "Daniel, what a surprise! It's been so long." He gave a faint smile. "Hey, Emily. Sorry for showing up like this. I was passing through town and thought, well, I hoped it'd be okay to stop by." She nodded, stepping aside. "Of course. Your family. Come in." He carried only a small duffel bag, setting it down gently by the entryway. She noticed how tired he looked, his eyes shadowed, his hair slightly unkempt, like someone who had been driving for hours without rest. "Is Michael home?" he asked. "Not yet," she said softly. "He's on a work trip. He should be back in a few days." Daniel nodded slowly, glancing around the living room. The space was warm, filled with books, a few framed photos, and the faint scent of cinnamon from a candle on the coffee table. "This place feels like you," he said quietly. Emily smiled, unsure what he meant. "Would you like some tea?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Tea sounds nice." As she moved into the kitchen, she could feel his presence behind her, steady, calm, but slightly uncertain. The kettle whistled softly, filling the silence between them. She glanced over her shoulder. "It's really been years, hasn't it?" Daniel gave a short laugh. "Almost 6, I think. Time moves faster than we expect." Emily poured the tea and handed him a cup. "You look like you've been through a lot." "Shh," she said gently. He stared into his cup for a moment before replying, "Maybe I have. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan. Sometimes you just need to stop and breathe again." Something about the way he said it made Emily's chest tighten. She understood that feeling all too well. Outside, the first raindrops began to fall, tapping gently against the window panes. The house felt smaller, quieter, almost intimate, but not in any forbidden way. Just two people sharing a space where unspoken stories lingered. Emily broke the silence with a faint smile. "It's good to see you again, Daniel. You were always kind, even back then." He looked up, his eyes soft. "You remember that?" "Of course," she said. Kindness is something people don't forget. Daniel didn't reply, but something in his expression changed a flicker of emotion. Quickly hidden. And though neither of them knew it then, that rainy afternoon would mark the beginning of a week that would change everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the quiet strength it takes to do the right thing. The rain didn't stop that evening. It came down in a steady rhythm, soft but endless, filling the air with the scent of earth and old memories. Emily stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass like tiny rivers. Behind her, the faint crackle of the fireplace brought warmth to the room. Daniel sat on the couch, holding the cup of tea she had given him earlier. He looked more at ease now, but his eyes carried that same quiet heaviness, the kind that comes from holding too many thoughts for too long. "It's strange," Emily said softly, turning from the window. "You sitting here again? It feels like time hasn't passed at all." Daniel smiled faintly. "It's been years, Emily, but I know what you mean. Some places feel frozen in time." She nodded, then sat across from him, her hands clasped together in her lap. "Do you remember the summer before Michael and I got married? You came to help us paint this house." He chuckled, a genuine sound that broke through the quiet. "How could I forget? I spilled an entire can of white paint on the porch steps." Michael laughed for 10 minutes straight. Emily laughed too, the memory warming her chest. "Yes, and you stayed late to clean it up while everyone else went home. You were always like that, quietly taking care of things no one noticed." Daniel shrugged, looking down at his cup. "I guess I just liked helping out. It made me feel useful." For a moment, silence filled the space again, comfortable but charged with something unspoken. Emily's mind wandered back to those days before the wedding, before life became a string of routines and responsibilities. She remembered how Daniel had been back then, gentle, thoughtful, a bit shy, but always the one who listened when others spoke too loudly. There had been a moment, once a small, forgettable one to anyone else, when they had been outside hanging lights for the engagement party. She had slipped while reaching for a branch, and he had caught her hand. For a heartbeat, their eyes had met. No words, no meaning beyond a fleeting spark of warmth. But it had stayed with her, tucked deep in the corners of her mind. A memory she never dared to revisit until now. "Do you ever think about the past?" Daniel asked suddenly, breaking through her thoughts. She looked at him, startled. "Sometimes, mostly when it rains like this." He smiled, but his eyes were far away. "I think about it a lot. The choices we make, the ones that lead us where we are." Emily tilted her head. "You sound like someone carrying regrets." "Maybe I am," he admitted quietly. "I left town too early. After your wedding, I couldn't stay. I told myself it was because of work, but maybe it was just easier not to be around." His words hung between them, heavy but honest. Emily didn't fully understand what he meant, but a part of her did. There had always been something in Daniel's gaze, something that lingered too long when he looked at her, even years ago. She had ignored it then, convincing herself it was just admiration or respect. Now, sitting across from him in the quiet glow of the fire, she realized it might have been something deeper. "You know," she said gently, "life has a way of moving on, even when we're not ready for it. I used to think everything would feel perfect once I got married. That love would stay simple." Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. "But it's not, is it?" She shook her head, smiling sadly. "No, it's not simple at all." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like 1,000 whispered confessions. Daniel leaned back, his expression soft. "You and Michael always seemed steady. I used to admire that." "We are steady," she said slowly, "but sometimes steady feels like standing still." Her words surprised even her. They weren't meant as criticism, just truth. Daniel nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand that. There was a pause, long enough for the clock on the wall to chime 7 times. Emily rose to light another candle, the soft flame dancing across the room. Do you still play guitar? She asked, trying to shift the mood. He smiled for the first time that evening, really smiled. Not as often as I should. I left my old one behind when I moved out west. I remember you used to play on the porch, she said, her tone filled with nostalgia. Michael and I would sit and listen. You always played that one song. What was it called? Northern Lights, he replied instantly. It was my favorite. She nodded slowly. It was mine too. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, two old souls remembering a melody from a time, and everything felt easier. But before the silence could grow too deep, Emily stood up and offered a small, careful S. The morning came quietly, wrapped in a soft gray mist. The rain had stopped, but the world outside still looked blurred and gentle. As if unsure whether to wake or dream a little longer, Emily moved through the kitchen in silence, making coffee the way she always did, 2 cups, even though only one would be used. The habit had started years ago when Michael began traveling often for work. But this morning, she realized she didn't mind the company that now filled the empty chair across from her. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his hair slightly tousled, his face calm but tired. Morning, he said softly. Morning, Emily replied with a small smile. Did you sleep well? He nodded. Better than I have in a long time. There was something about the way he said it that made her pause. She turned back to the counter, trying to hide her faint smile as she poured his coffee. Outside, the clouds began to part and sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. It felt like a sign, a quiet reminder that even after long storms, it always found its way back. Daniel sat at the table, looking around the house. Everything's still the same, he said, even the clock above the fireplace. Emily laughed lightly. That clock hasn't worked in years, but I can't bring myself to take it down. It's become part of the room. He smiled, his eyes thoughtful. You always saw beauty in the things most people overlooked. The compliment caught her off guard. I guess I just like what feels familiar. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a simple look, yet it carried something deeper, unspoken but undeniable. Emily quickly looked away, stirring her coffee, though it didn't need stirring to ease the tension. She said, I'm going to the market this afternoon. We're low on vegetables. Do you want to come along? Daniel hesitated. Sure, it's been a while since I've done something as normal as grocery shopping. When they reached town, Maplewood streets were alive with weekend energy. Families strolled between stalls, the scent of fresh bread and roasted nuts filling the air. Emily and Daniel walked side by side, talking about small things, old movies, their favorite foods. The way autumn always felt too short. But between the laughter and light conversation, there was an undercurrent. Neither of them mentioned the quiet awareness that time had changed them. But not everything between them had faded. At one of the stands, a vendor called out cheerfully, You two make a lovely couple. Emily froze, almost dropping the apples she was holding. Daniel laughed awkwardly and waved it off. We're Nachi's, my brother's wife. The vendor chuckled. Ah, I see. My mistake. Still, there's warmth between you. It's rare to see people talk with that kind of care. Emily smiled politely and quickly turned away. Her heart, however, thudded in her chest. She didn't know why the comment affected her so deeply. Maybe because for a brief second, it felt nice to be seen not as someone's wife waiting at home, but as a woman still capable of being understood. As they walked back to the car, neither spoke for a long while. Finally, Daniel said, I'm sorry about what that man said. It must have been awkward. Emily shook her head. It's fine. He didn't mean anything by it, but her voice sounded too calm, too careful. Halfway home, the sky darkened again. A sudden burst of rain forced them to pull over by the old lake road. The downpour was fierce, drumming against the windshield like 1,000 tiny hands. They sat in silence, The sound surrounding them. Emily watched the raindrops trail down the glass, each one catching flashes of gray light. "It's strange," she said quietly. "Every time it rains, I feel like life slows down. Like the world is trying to tell us to listen." Daniel nodded. "Maybe it's telling us to remember." "Remember what?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "The things we never said. The people we were before life got so complicated." Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. The boy she remembered had grown into a man who carried both weariness and warmth in his eyes. Time had changed his face, but not the way his gaze seemed to see through her defenses. She smiled faintly, her voice gentle. "You always did think too deeply." He returned the smile. "And you always tried to understand people. Maybe that's why talking to you still feels easy." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain softened, the sound turning into a whisper. The world outside felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Then Emily's phone buzzed. Michael's name appeared on the screen. She answered quickly, her voice steady. "Hi, honey." "Hey, Em," Michael said, his tone brisk but warm. "Just wanted to check in. How's everything?" "Everything's fine," she replied. "Daniel stopped by." "He's staying for a few days," Michael said after a pause. "That's good. He could use some family time." They chatted briefly, and when the call ended, Emily let out a slow breath. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Michael's lucky," he said quietly. "He's got someone who still waits for him with patience." Emily looked out the window again. Patience is easier than losing hope. Her words lingered in the air, and Daniel didn't reply. Instead, he started the car again as the rain eased, driving them home through the misty road. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew something had shifted. A memory had woken, a connection had stirred, and no matter how much they tried to ignore it, fate had quietly rewritten the space between them. And somewhere deep inside, Emily wondered, not with guilt, but with confusion, why the sound of rain suddenly felt like a memory calling her name. The rain had stopped by the time they reached home, but the silence between them lingered like a cloud that refused to pass. Emily stepped out of the car first, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. The air smelled fresh like earth, and pine but something inside her felt heavier than before. Daniel followed quietly, carrying the grocery bags inside. They didn't speak as they unpacked. The sound of paper rustling and dishes clinking filled the space where words should have been. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Thank you for today. I didn't realize how much I missed." "Normal days." Emily smiled faintly. "It's nice to do ordinary things sometimes. They make the world feel less complicated." He nodded, his eyes softening. "Maybe that's what I've been missing. Simplicity." She looked at him, her heart tugging gently. There was something fragile about his voice, like it carried a truth he wasn't ready to share. Later that evening, after dinner, Daniel offered to help wash the dishes. They worked side by side, their movements quiet and steady. The sound of running water filled the room as Emily handed him a towel. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" he asked suddenly. "Back?" She repeated. "To before everything changed," he said. "Before people grew apart, before life became more about duty than dreams." Emily hesitated, her eyes on the sink. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I also think everything that happens, good or bad, shapes who we are. Maybe we're not meant to go back." He nodded slowly, but the look in his eyes said he didn't quite believe that. When the dishes were done, Emily made tea and they sat in the living room. The fire burned low, casting golden shadows across the walls. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the family photographs on the mantel. "Wedding pictures, birthdays, vacations. You and Michael look happy there," he said quietly. Emily followed his eyes to a picture from their wedding day. She was smiling, radiant, holding Michael's hand. "We were," she said softly, "and we still are in our own way. Just different now." Daniel looked down at his cup. "Different how?" She took a breath. "We've learned to love through distance. He gives everything to his work, and I've learned to be patient. Love can survive that, I think. But sometimes it forgets how to feel alive. Okay? Her words hung in the air like smoke, visible, delicate, but fading too quickly. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. You deserve to feel alive, Emily. She turned toward him, startled by the honesty in his tone. Daniel, he shook his head. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that out loud. But the words were already there. Between them, gentle, unthreatening, but impossibly real. For a long while, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, two people sat only a few feet apart, both knowing there were things that could never be said aloud. Emily looked into the fire. You know, I used to think love was something you could control. That if you made all the right choices, it would always stay pure and simple. But the truth is it's fragile. It changes shape depending on where life takes you. Daniel's voice trembled slightly when he replied. Sometimes it hides behind silence. She nodded slowly. Yes, sometimes it does. There was something deeply human in that moment. Not forbidden, not wrong. Just the ache of two souls who understood each other a little too well. Emily rose and walked to the window. The moonlight had returned, silver and soft across the garden. When I first met you, she said quietly, I thought you were a lot like Michael. But I was wrong. You feel things differently. You see things differently. Daniel stood a few steps behind her, keeping a respectful distance. And you always see the best in people, he said, even when they don't deserve it. She turned to him, her voice gentle but steady. Daniel, you're not someone who doesn't deserve kindness. He smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I've made choices I still question. Walking away, for one. You had your reasons, she said. Maybe, he whispered, but I never stopped thinking about what could have been different. Emily's heart tightened. She wanted to say something. The next morning arrived, wrapped in a heavy stillness. Clouds lingered over Maplewood like unspoken thoughts that refused to clear. Emily stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, her mind replaying the night before the firelight, Daniel's words, and the silence that followed. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that look in his, the kind that spoke of things he would never dare to say again. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. Morning, she said quietly. Morning, Daniel replied, his voice soft. I was thinking I should head out today. Emily froze, the mug in her hands trembling slightly. Today? He nodded, leaning against the doorframe. I've been here long enough. I didn't mean to overstay. She turned to face him. You haven't overstayed your family. You know that. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe, but sometimes staying too long makes it harder to leave. His words landed heavier than either of them expected. Emily looked down at the counter, her throat tightening. Where will you go? Maybe back west, he said. Or maybe nowhere for a while? I need to figure things out. The room fell silent. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock filled the space. Emily took a slow breath. Daniel, before you go, there's something I need to ask. He looked up, cautious. What is it? She hesitated. Why now? After all these years, why come back? He sighed deeply, his voice rough around the edges. I wish I could say it was just coincidence. But it wasn't. I came because I needed to see if what I felt years ago was still real. Or just a foolish memory I held on to for too long. Her heart pounded. Daniel, he stepped closer. Not in defiance, but in honesty. You don't have to say anything. I know this isn't right, and I'd never want to hurt you or Michael. But I couldn't carry it anymore. I had to tell the truth at least once in my life. Emily's eyes stung with tears. You didn't have to protect me from that truth, Daniel. But you did. All these years. He shook his head. It wasn't protection. It was fear. I was afraid that if I said it, then I'd ruin everything you and my brother had. And you were happy. You deserved that. Emily looked away, her voice trembling. I was happy. I am. Mostly. But sometimes I wonder what happiness really means. Is it peace? Is it love? Or just the absence of loneliness? Daniel's gaze softened. Maybe it's all of them. Or maybe it's something we keep chasing because we're scared to admit we already lost it somewhere along the way. She met his eyes again, and for a long, fragile moment, they stood there in silence, to people bound not by promises, but by understanding. Finally, Emily spoke. Daniel, what you're feeling, it's honest. But honesty doesn't always mean we can act on it. Kaino, he said quietly. That's why I'm leaving. She took a step closer, her voice breaking slightly. Don't go angry. Don't go thinking this meant nothing, because it did. It means we're human. That's all. Kay nodded slowly. Then tell me one thing before I go. If life had been different, if timing had been kinder, do you think things would have changed between us? Emily hesitated, her eyes glistening. I don't know, she whispered. But sometimes I think the heart knows long before the mind ever does. And maybe that's why it hurts, because it remembers what never happened. Daniel closed his eyes, as if trying to hold on to her words. When he opened them again, there was peace in his expression, mixed with quiet sorrow. You've always had a way with truth, he said. She smiled faintly. Truth is all I can offer. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, a simple charm shaped like a leaf. Do you remember this? Emily gasped softly. The charm from your mother's garden. You gave it to me the day before the wedding. You said it was for good luck. I took it back when you moved away, he said gently. I've kept it ever since. But it doesn't belong to me anymore. He placed it in her hand. The silver felt cool, its surface worn smooth with time. Daniel. He smiled sadly. Don't say anything. Just keep it. A reminder that some feelings can exist quietly without breaking anything. Tears welled in her eyes. You've always been braver than you think. He shook his head. No, Emily, you are. You chose love, loyalty, and grace even when it wasn't easy. For a long moment, they stood in the doorway, the morning light pouring through like a quiet blessing. Finally, Daniel turned toward the car, his steps slow but certain. Emily followed him to the porch, her hands clasped together. Will you at least let Michael know you stopped by? She asked. He paused and smiled faintly. I'll call him once I'm on the road. He deserves to know. He's a good man. He is, she said softly. And so are you. Daniel looked at her one last time. Goodbye, Emily. Goodbye, Daniel. He got into the car and started the engine. As the tires rolled down the gravel path, Emily stood still, the pendant in her hand catching the morning sun. She felt a strange calm settle over her, sorrow and gratitude woven together. Some truths, she realized, don't need to be hidden or confessed. They just need to be honored. And as Daniel's car disappeared down the road, Emily whispered to the wind, Thank you for saying what I couldn't. Days turned into weeks after Daniel's departure. Yet his absence lingered in the corners of Emily's home like the fading scent of rain. The mornings felt quieter, though not empty, more like the silence that follows a song that meant something. She went through her routines, tending to the garden, walking to the nearby cafe. Keeping busy, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to think about her own heart, not just the roles she filled for others. She wasn't lost. She was learning what it meant to pause, to breathe, to feel without guilt. One golden afternoon, as the autumn leaves began to fall, Michael returned from his work trip. He looked tired but content, his eyes softening the moment he saw her waiting at the porch. He said, setting down his bag. You look different. Peaceful, maybe? She smiled gently. I think I finally am. He walked closer, pulling her into a quiet embrace. It wasn't filled with grand emotion, just the comfort of two people who had weathered time together. Over dinner that evening, conversation flowed easily. Michael talked about his meetings, the places he visited, and the people he met. Emily listened. But a small part of her wondered when or how she should mention. Daniel's visit, it wasn't that she wanted to hide it. It was just delicate. Some truths weren't meant to wound. They were meant to clear the air. As she placed 2 cups of tea on the table, Michael spoke first. I ran into Daniel on my way back. He called me last week. Emily froze for a brief second. He did. Yes, Michael said quietly. He told me he came by. Said he needed to talk to you about something important. He didn't say much, just that he owed you honesty. Emily exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly around her teacup. He did tell me the truth about his feelings. But nothing happened, Michael. Nothing ever could. He looked at her, his expression calm but serious. I know. Daniel said the same. He told me he respected you too much to ever cross that line. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not from guilt, but from relief. I didn't want to hurt you. Michael reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You didn't. Emily, I've known my brother all my life. I know how he feels things deeply, sometimes too deeply. And I know you. You've always led with grace. I trust you. The words settled in her heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. I'm glad he talked to you, she whispered. He needed that. We all did. Michael nodded. He told me he's going to stay in British Columbia for a while, start fresh. Maybe open that small art studio he always dreamed about? He sounded lighter. Emily smiled faintly. He deserves peace. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their tea, letting the soft hum of the evening fill the space between them. Later that night, as Emily stood by the window, the moonlight casting a pale glow across the living room, she thought about the past few weeks, the memories that resurfaced, the conversations that changed everything, and the quiet courage it took to let go. She realized something profound. Love isn't always about choosing one person over another. Sometimes it's about choosing kindness for others. And for yourself, in the following days, Emily found herself writing again, small notes. Thoughts, reflections she hadn't put into words in years. She wrote about forgiveness, about how love can exist in silence without asking to be returned. And how every story, no matter how complicated, has room for grace. One afternoon, she received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, Daniel's. It was short, but honest. Emily, thank you for listening when I needed to be heard. I left Maplewood with a heavy heart, but I'm lighter now. Your words helped me let go of something I was never meant to hold forever. I hope in time we both find the peace we were searching for, even if it looks different than we once imagined. Tell Michael I'm proud of him. He's lucky, but so am I, for having known you the way I did. Daniel and Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the drawer of her writing desk. Then she opened the small box where she had kept the silver leaf pendant. For a moment, she just looked at it, its edges smooth, shine faded, but still gentle. Instead of sadness, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for what was, for what never became, and for what still could be in another form. Another chapter. That evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the trees, Emily and Michael walked through the garden together. The air smelled of pine and rain and